Hello, fourth grade, and welcome to lesson 3 of chapter 5. This lesson is titled, What Drove People In and Out of the Southwest? So in this lesson, we're going to use our investigative skills to explore the events and the opportunities that drove people in and out of the Southwest. So what are some of the things that made people want to go there? And what are some things that pushed people away from it? Now here you can see an illustration, and the caption reads, "The Battle of the Alamo took place in San Antonio, Texas in 1836. Let's go ahead and jump directly into our lesson. Now first, of course, we're going to read through the blue bars so we know what we need to do while we read. Look at the title. What does it suggest about the kind of text this will be? Circle words and phrases that you do not know. Underline important facts and details that answer the question, who, what, when, where, and why. Highlight clues in the text that help you understand the reasons behind this conflict. What was happening when William Travis sent his letter during the Battle of the Alamo? What does the letter say he plans to do? What words did he use to describe his determination? The Battle of the Alamo. In 1836, Texas was part of Mexico. However, Texans who had migrated from the United States wanted independence from the Mexican government. This led to fighting between Texans and the Mexican army. The Alamo was an abandoned Spanish mission in San Antonio, Texas. About 200 Texans had set up a fort in the Alamo to hold off the Mexican troops. Mexican General Santa Anna surrounded the fort with thousands of Mexican soldiers. Santa Anna ordered the men inside the Alamo to surrender. Alamo commander William Travis wrote a letter to the Texas Army General Sam Houston. Travis asked for more troops to come help. He promised to never surrender or retreat. Travis and his soldiers fought bravely, but in the end, every man was killed by the Mexican soldiers. However, his letter and actions had a tremendous impact on the Texan army. It gave them the determination to win the war for Texas independence a few months later. Primary source, in their words, William Travis. I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his honor and that of his country, victory or death. William Travis's letter, written from the Alamo to Sam Houston, February 14, 1836. The bravery of William Travis and the defenders of the Alamo is honored in this monument, the Alamo Cenotaph in San Antonio, Texas. Let's take a look at our first graphic organizer. Now here we're going to talk about chronology. Chronology is the order that things happen, so things happening in time order. So when you are reading a text and you're looking for chronological events, you're looking for keywords that will tell you what happened first, next, last. You're looking for dates that give you a timeline of when things were happening. So you're going to read through the text all the way through, watch for specific dates or signal words. So anything that says before or after. Examine any maps or other images or pictures. Look at the titles and the captions and the labels. See if there's information in those captions about when things were happening, and then connect the information to find your answers. So the event that we're looking at here is William Travis writes a letter from the Battle of the Alamo, promising to never give up. Now the date we just read after that clip from the primary source was February 14th, 1836. Now, the result of that letter is that Travis's letter inspired Texans and Americans to join the fight for independence, and then Texas ended up winning the war a few months later. So the event is what happened, when it happened, and what happened because of it. So we're going to fill in 4 different sections while reading through our textbook, 4 different events, the dates that they happened, and what happened as a result of those events. So let's jump into our textbook, lesson 3, what drove people in and out of the Southwest. The Texas Revolution. In the early part of the 1800s, most of the Southwest, including Texas, was a part of Mexico. After the Mexican government gained its independence from Spain, it encouraged people from Mexico and the United States to settle in Texas. This caused a huge rise in population. By the 1830s, American settlers outnumbered the Mexicans in Texas. The Mexican government feared losing control of the area. They created laws and taxes against the settlers. Texans decided to separate from Mexico, resulting in the Texas Revolution. At the start of 1836, Mexican leader Santa Anna sent thousands of trained soldiers to stop the rebellion. Texas lost the Battle of the Alamo in San Antonio on March 6, 1836. Less than a month later, Texans lost the Battle of Goliad. Not a single Texan survived. Losing these battles made the Texans more determined to win their independence. The Battle of San Jacinto was the turning point. The leader of the Texan army, Sam Houston, led a surprise attack on Santa Anna's troops on April 21, 1836. After just 20 minutes, the Mexican army surrendered. The Republic of Texas was recognized as a free and independent nation. Fighting continued with Mexico, however. Fearing they might lose their independence, Texans wanted to join the United States. Texas would enter the Union as a state on December 29, 1845. So let's take a look at our timeline here. Now, 1821, Mexico gains independence from Spain. So this is an important part that we can put into our graphic organizer. 1836, Texas becomes an independent republic. 1865, the cowboy era of cattle drives begins. In 1889, Oklahoma is open for settlement, and 1935, the Dust Bowl begins. So we're going to read more about these different things as we go. The War with Mexico. James K. Polk was president when the United States annexed or added Texas in 1845. He had worked towards annexing the state. He wanted the United States to reach from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. President Polk also hoped to annex the area called Mexican California. Mexico refused to sell the land, fearing the United States was becoming too large and powerful. Fighting broke out in the area of Mexico. In May 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico. American forces invaded Mexico, overwhelming the soldiers there. The war ended in 1848, and Mexico gave up the land that now makes up most of the Southwest and the West. Later, the United States brought a smaller area of land located in present-day Arizona and New Mexico from Mexico. Here you can see the lands that were gained from Mexico between the years 1845 and 1854. So let's pause for a second, go back to our graphic organizer. So the first event we talked about was that Mexico won its independence from Spain, and that happened in the year 1821. So as a result of that, the Mexican government encouraged people, including Americans, to try and come and settle in the territory that is now known as Texas. American cowboys. Cattle developed as a main economic resource in the Southwest. The open grasslands of Texas and Oklahoma were well suited for cattle. After the American Civil War, northern cities began growing and the population needed food. After the American Civil War, northern cities began growing and the population needed food. People there would pay high prices for beef, but it was not easy to transport cattle from the Southwest. In 1867, a man named Joseph McCoy came up with a solution. He told Texas ranchers if they could get their cattle into the railroad at Abilene, Kansas, he would pay a good price and ship the cattle north. Ranchers needed more cowboys to herd the cattle from Texas to Kansas. Many people, including African Americans, Native Americans, Mexicans, and former Civil War soldiers, joined the booming cattle industry. Biography: Lizzie Johnson. Lizzie Johnson lived in Texas from 1840 to 1924. Johnson was a teacher, but realized she could be successful raising cattle. In 1871, she registered her own cattle brand and started raising cattle for beef. As the first woman to drive her own cattle on the trail, Lizzie Johnson earned the name Cattle Queen of Texas. Cattle drives. Cattle drives were the main work for cowboys in the 1800s. Cowboys would round up cattle from several ranches at once and move them or drive them as one huge herd. Ranchers branded their cattle to mark their ownership. Cowboys used established trails such as the Chisholm Trail. It connected San Antonio, Texas to the railroad at Abilene, Kansas. A cattle drive could last as many as 3 months. Life on the trail was dangerous and hard. Droughts, storms, and wild animals were all risks to cattle. Cowboys not only worried about keeping the cattle from getting sick or lost, but they also had to take turns each night watching out for rustlers or cattle thieves. A major danger every cowboy feared was a stampede. If something startled the cattle, the whole herd would start running away. Cowboys, horses, and younger cattle could get trampled to death. Most of the cattle drives had ended by the late 1880s. Railroads had expanded into Texas, so ranchers did not have to drive their cattle to Kansas. The invention of barbed wire fencing made it possible for ranchers to fence in cattle and keep them secure. Cowboys were no longer needed in such large numbers to watch over the herds. Okay, going back to our graphic organizer, again, we can put in that cattle drives began from Texas that were heading towards Kansas. And this was in the year 1867. And as a result, people went to the Southwest to get jobs as ranchers or as cowboys because they needed them in such large numbers at the time when it first started. Oklahoma land rush. The state of Oklahoma was originally part of an area called the Indian Territory. At first, the land was considered unsuitable for settlers. The federal government had forced groups of Native Americans, such as the Creek, Cherokee, and Choctaw, from their lands in the southeast and into Indian Territory. But as American settlers moved west, they wanted the land. In the spring of 1889, President Benjamin Harrison declared nearly 2 million acres of Indian Territory open for the American settlers. According to the law at the time, a single settler could claim 160 acres of open public land for free. Anyone who wanted land could join a race to claim a piece of the territory. The Native Americans were once again forced onto new reservations farther west. The race to claim a piece of land was set for April 22nd, 1889. More than 50,000 people turned up all along the border of the open lands to stake a claim. At noon, rifles and cannons fired and the Oklahoma land rush began. People on horses and families in wagons raced across the prairie. A few people tried to sneak into the territory and claim land before the official land rush began. They became known as the Sooners. The government helped several more land rushers between 1890 and 1905. The population of the Oklahoma Territory increased from 60,000 people to 720,000 people in those 15 years. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, nearly all of the land that had once been granted to Native Americans was owned by settlers. All right, so let's go back to our graphic organizer. We're going to talk about the third section that we're going to fill in, and we're going to list the Oklahoma land rush. The Oklahoma land rush brought lots of people into the Oklahoma region, and this was in the year 1889. And as a result, thousands of people flooded into Oklahoma to claim the public land that they were promised or that was made available to them. Native American tribal citizenship. The United States government recognizes more than 500 Native American groups as sovereign. This means they have their own government and citizenship separate from the United States. Native American nations were established through treaties with the federal government. They operate similarly to state governments today. The Navajo Nation is the largest sovereign nation in the United States. Navajo land extended into parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. The borders and government were established in the 1920s. Today, the population of the Navajo Nation is more than 250,000 people. The Navajo government was established in 1923. It organized into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. The legislative branch is made up of a council with 88 elected members. The council makes decisions about many things, from education and healthcare to economic agreements with surrounding states. Council meetings often take place in the Navajo language. It is one of the ways that the Navajo strive to preserve their cultural heritage. Citizenship is a source of pride and patriotism for the Navajo. Citizens of the Navajo Nation may travel on Navajo land, vote in their elections, and receive services. Though the Navajo are citizens of their Native American sovereign nation, they are also citizens of the United States. They have all the rights of being an American citizen, including voting at national elections. The Dust Bowl. The Oklahoma land rush brought a flood of people into the Southwest. Some were inexperienced farmers who hoped to make a living on the frontier. The dry climate was not ideal for many crops except wheat. Farmers cleared the land of grass and settlers and planted wheat. In the spring of 1930, the worst drought the settlers had ever seen began. Years of plowing and planting only one type of crops had left the topsoil dry and dusty. Without the strong network of roots from the prairie grass to hold it down, the wind and the water could easily erode the soil. At the same time, huge windstorms blew across the Great Plains. These storms hit Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado very hard, carrying topsoil away. Clouds of dust blew as far as New York City. The environmental disaster is known as the Dust Bowl. During this disaster, farmers could not grow food. Livestock had nothing to eat or drink. To make matters worse, it happened during the Great Depression. The Great Depression was an economic crisis that started in 1929. By 1933, about half the banks in the United States had no money. Without money, businesses could not pay workers. Without jobs, workers could not buy food. Dust clouds loom over farms during the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl made conditions worse when it destroyed farmland. Food became expensive. Farmers joined the millions of people without jobs. To survive, millions of people left the Southwest. They formed the largest migration in American history. More than 400,000 people left Oklahoma alone during the Dust Bowl. The drought finally ended in the late 1930s. To prevent another Dust Bowl, the federal government passed the Soil Conservation Act. New farming techniques were put in place to limit plowing and reduce erosion in dry climates. In their words, John Steinbeck, men and women huddled in their houses, and they tied handkerchiefs over their noses when they went out and wore goggles to protect their eyes. When the night came again, it was black night, for the stars could not pierce the dust to get down, and the window lights could not even spread beyond their own yards. This is an excerpt from John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, that was written in 1939. Now, for the last section of our graphic organizer, what we're going to put in was that severe droughts caused the beginning of the Dust Bowl. So severe droughts and farming practices caused the Dust Bowl. This was in the year 1930. And as a result, millions of people migrated out of the states that were affected by the Dust Bowl, trying to find shelter and food and jobs elsewhere. Moving on, let's take a look at our writing sections. Our first writing section says, write a newspaper article. Imagine you're a journalist in the past who is reporting on changes in the Southwest. Choose one of the events that you think influenced the growth of the Southwest. So one of the things that brought people into the Southwest. Use your research to write a short article about the event. Describe who, what, when, where, and why it happened, and how it affected people living in the Southwest. For the next section, where it says connect the essential question, under where it says pull it together, choose one of the events in the Southwest that you studied in this lesson. Not all of the events had the same impact on people. How do you think the event you chose affects different groups of people that live in the region today? So you can talk about people coming and leaving the Southwest. You can talk about the land rush and the opportunities that it provided. You can talk about the Dust Bowl. You can also talk about what was happening with the Native Americans that were living there once this land rush started. How did it affect their lives? What was being forced on them? And what kind of changes were they forced to endure because of what was going on with that growth? All right, that takes us to the end of this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.